All right, everyone. I am excited for today's RD2RD live show. I am joined today by Moshumi, dietitian Moshumi. We're going to be talking about long-term care consulting. And I want to kick this off by saying I was guilty of kind of having a certain mindset about long-term care. And as I've, grown RD2RD and looking at resources for dietitians, I've noticed that a lot of the, products that I promote and the ideas, whether it's on social media or just conversations in general, really had a complete lack of that focus on long-term care. And I decided to explore that. What were my own biases about long-term care and what did those stem from? And perhaps there was something I didn't know about dietitians and the work they do in long-term care. And so this, live show is really an exploration of what are the opportunities for dietitians to build not just employment employed by a long-term care facility, but a business where we do consulting, where we're really picking and choosing the work that we do, and what is that like, and how to shine a light on the opportunity and the skill set that you need to be successful. So, Moshumi, thank you for being here today, and I'm excited to dive into this topic.
Thank you, Megan. And this is a great platform, RD2RD. So thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here and to talk about, my passion and what I've been doing for the past 20 plus years as a consultant in long-term assisted and group homes and hospice. So
Yeah.
Very to be here. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I think, to kind of gauge, who we have listening in, if you have any, tell us a little bit about yourself. Do you currently work in long-term care? Are you looking to move into, more of a consulting type role where you're running your own business, or are this completely, new to you? So I have, if you have questions as we go along, feel free to, type them in the comments. I'll be keeping a lookout, but I will go ahead and, dive into those that, I've prepared for today. So you mentioned you've been in this, this area of dietetics for 20 years. So kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started, and the business that you run now.
Okay, perfect. So hello again, everybody. My name is Moshumi, and I am a registered dietitian. And let's see, so I grew up in India, and I came here with a master's degree in human nutrition from India, and got another master's from here, and and got registered as a dietitian. At the same time that I was working at the county here, for the county here in a WIC clinic in Michigan. So so I started my career working at the county. And then as I was getting registered to be a dietitian, interim, I changed to a clinical position at a local hospital here and did the typical 8 to 5 job. So anyways, life was happening. And then I was pregnant with my firstborn child, and I wanted to find something flexible because I knew I didn't want to go like a 8 to 5 job. So I was then looking around, and I am a graduate of Michigan State University. So I then approached a couple of my professors and asked if they knew of anything flexible. And it so happened that one of my professors, she called me back and she's like, Mishumi, there is this company that is looking for a consultant position in a long-term care locally here. So, of course, I applied and got that position. And it was for about, I'm trying to think, maybe in the week, I just would work like 8 hours. It was very flexible. And I still was working as a consultant, but for a company.
I see.
It was like the perfect fit for my lifestyle because it was so very flexible. I could pick my hours, and I really enjoyed doing that because I could maintain my registration at the same time. It was very gave me the flexibility, and enjoyed my time there. So then working in. I'm trying to remember, possibly a few years
Right.
into that long-term facility. And that's when, as my kids were growing up, I was looking into more hours and, how I could expand this whole thing. So then with the same company, then I had, I took up another home too. Anyways, long story short, just like you do with, I think with private practice or with any, in fact, with any business or any position you are in, I think word of mouth and your experience matters a lot. So one of my coworkers happened to change positions, and she became a director of nursing at a different facility. And then she approached me because they liked my quality of work. And she said, Mashumi, would you like to work as a consultant for our nursing home? And I said, yes, I would. And that's how I actually then launched my own consulting or started my own consulting with long-term or assisted or group homes. So
I
yeah,
think
that was kind of
that
journey.
right there, I think, is the point where I want to ask that question of all of us, if we're starting our own business, there's this giant, sometimes we feel like we have to have, all of these things necessarily in place. But what I hear you saying, it was that networking and that opportunity where now you have your own contract. So can you kind of dive into a little bit of the work you were doing before was kind of an employee type of situation where you were getting paid versus moving into this contract? What's the difference there?
So before I was working as a consultant with a company,
Okay.
and the company then, so what you do is just submit your invoice and all of that to your company, whichever company that you're working under, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I do my own consulting, starting from like the contract to the forms to the invoice, everything is on me. So I'm really glad you brought this up, Megan. It sounds really simple to me now because, it's been so many years. But I'll be honest, I was nervous at that time because I did not have the resources I needed. Like, for example, I didn't have a contract in place, right? So I did need, to talk to a lawyer, have a contract done. Again, because when you're working as an employee versus when you're working as a consultant, things are very different, right? A consulting job or contract could, depending on you and the nursing home or the assisted living, it could go month to month, or if, some of them like to do 3 months. However, whatever you guys kind of bargain or talk about. So that is very different from where you're an employee. So I actually had to figure it all out on my own. But I think, I was very excited, and somewhere in my heart, I kind of wanted to work for myself. I just, I love that concept of I am the owner of my business. It's I can do it at my own time, my own terms. And so then I developed all these different forms. And unlike now, 20, 21 years back, or, so many years back, not everything was online. So it was all paper. And so I had to develop all these paper forms. I remember bring this whole bundle in and then talk to the administrator. That's how I started my first consulting position, again, through the whole networking. And then, it just kind of, I say it's like this balloon, and it just kind of grows and grows to
But
the point where,
if you kind of, I think this whole point you made about being nervous about, the first time you're going to go out and try to get a contract for your own business, I'm sitting here thinking about myself, I would be very intimidated. And how did you kind of get past that, and what recommendations do you have for someone who's kind of listening in and is totally saying, yeah, that's me, maybe I have some experience, or maybe those opportunities have come up but I've just kind of shied away because I'm not, what if I do it wrong, what if I make that's a big jump.
it is. So this is what I would recommend. Number one, I would definitely say, gain that experience of maybe starting out as like an employee or working for a company, quote unquote, for like a couple years, so you get a feel of what long-term care is about. Now when you get that offer, jump into it. I know it sounds intimidating, it sounds like there is so much, but I'll be honest with you, like, I have a bundle that I think I was planning to put on RD2RD because I absolutely love this medium, where I'll have all the forms. So if somebody needed it, they can, just all they would have to do is open it up, and they've got all their forms in place of what's needed. Now, I know state to state there might be variations in contract and whatnot, but when you have that going for you, when you are confident in the quality of work you're producing, I will tell you, it can be one of the best, most rewarding jobs you would have. I just absolutely love it. And I'll tell you one another thing. I hear a lot of people say, oh, long term, I'm so burnt out. There's that whole burnout thing too. Now, when you work as a consultant, though, in long term, I feel like, my experience, you really don't get burnt out because of the variety that is offered to you. So, if I can, if I may say so, I consult with, like, say, long-term care, which are the nursing homes. I do some assisted livings. I do group homes. I have a hospice I work with, and a rehab group, and then my own private consulting, right? So why do I do this? Because I think I love variety. For me, an 8 to 5 job where I'm doing the same thing over and over again, I think it's my personality, I would get burnt out. This is, again, just me. So I absolutely love, Megan, the variety that these different homes bring to me. I could be doing, for one home, I might be doing just high risk. For another, for, like, say, the assisted livings, I do their menus primarily. So there's so much variety. There's so many different age groups I'm, dealing with. So.
And I think the other element that people, are intimidated by is what you have to know, I think, to be successful in, long-term care from and also even maybe assisted in group homes, maybe to a lesser degree, the regulatory elements. And when you go from working for a company to it being your own contract, that must feel a little bit different. How did you get the level of expertise? Now, you said you worked for a couple of years in long-term care, and that your quality, again, I can't ever stress enough that doing great work creates, opportunity, going forward. Did that prepare you enough, or what else did you do to fill in some of those gaps? And how did you handle the nerves of what if I miss something? What if the state comes in and I mess everything up? I guess that's what I'm kind of throwing out there.
Like you said, Megan, I think it is, and I think I also said this, I would, when you are working for a consultant position, I think it's I wouldn't start out of school as a consultant. Or even if I did that, I would still work under a company where I've got the directions, right? Everything's written out for me. For example, say state walks in, I might have like a supervisor dietitian in there to help me out if there is an issue. Versus if you are the consultant, you're the one who's kind of in charge. Say there's a sanitation violation or anything like that, then you are the one who is in charge there. And how do you get to that level? I think you get to that level with the experience, working there for so many years. You do feel very confident. You do know. Now, did I feel confident when I started? In all honesty, possibly not. But, I took the leap and I jumped in. I'm like, how difficult can this be? And sometimes I think as dietitians also, we overjudge ourselves. It's like, or being too critical. So, and every job after that, after I launched my first one, was through word of mouth. It was everybody came in through a referral. So that again, I just want to stress, our quality of work. I am not at all saying compromise, because I have also heard that part where people start out with one home for so many hours and then maybe they're given two homes. I would say, and I have said no to that. So what I mean by quality of work is to do justice to the home and, do the best you can in terms of time and the quality of work you're giving. And it just expands. Again, I am going to say it's like one-on-one private consulting, where when you have a client that really loves you, they make the referral, right? So it's like that.
Yeah, and I think that getting your, foot in the door, whether it's, private practice or otherwise, a lot of what we do is word of mouth and through our network. And I think there's a lot of different ways to get to success. And I always think shining a light on, what we hear out in the world, which is often people with, marketing things they, want to sell to us, have a certain methodology that they want us to follow. But I think it's important to listen to lots of different voices, and maybe ones that don't have, a giant advertising. They're not advertising their method for success, because sometimes that consistently word of mouth and opportunities through networking is just that consistent, how businesses succeed is network and word of mouth. So I think just pointing that out, that oftentimes we feel like we have to have this giant plan of how we're going to market and launch our business, when in reality, sometimes, and for a lot of people, that isn't necessarily the path they took. So I think it's really great that you kind of illustrated that for us.
Sure.
Now, you mentioned burnout, you mentioned long hours, but you also mentioned kind of flexibility for dietitians. Now, we know healthcare has certainly changed a lot in the last 10 and certainly 20 years, but especially as we see the acuity in the hospital and more of the, how payments are done and readmissions, what are some of the changes that you see as far as in the industry and the type of work, and then opportunities going forward? You mentioned group homes and assisted living. What do you see for people who maybe don't have this bird's eye view that you do of, this type of work?
So the one thing that I am seeing, or I'm seeing, especially with group homes that I never saw so much before, they are actually looking in to hiring contracted or consultant dietitians, primarily to do like their menus, because most places now want these balanced menus, which never used to be there so much before. And then I think once you are doing well in giving them or making a good menu as per their needs, depending on the age group and so on. What I've seen more is where they then might call you for like a consultation for one of their residents, right? So what I'm saying is I'm seeing that prospect change more and more, where before, like say 15 years back, they might just have anybody working in that group home just write a menu. What's the big deal? We can just write a menu, kind of. So that I definitely see. I do see, it's all electric, it's all EMRs now. So it's all medical records. So I think as a consultant, there is actually even more flexibility now, meaning, if it was all paper, I might have had to go into the buildings, say during COVID times. Now, because I have access to all these buildings, I just work from home, and I absolutely really, really enjoy it. I do, I will peek in once in a while or whatever as is needed by the home. But it's not like, I am required to go in there, because I could still do my menus sitting at home. I could still do my charting. As a consultant, I'm seeing my high risk patients or residents. I always do have a certified dietary manager, or I might have an RD, like an entry level RD who works in there full time. And so they have like an ongoing list of like high risk residents that I need to see for them. So these I think are some of the things I'm trying to think that have changed, or I think have actually worked out more for consultants, especially in like the assisted living environment, group homes. I am seeing more people ask for dietitians, and that is absolutely wonderful. I think for people who are aspiring to be consultants in these group home settings. So,
how did you? So that's I think valuable information. So thanks for sharing. And kind of getting back to this, kind of running your own, business. How did you approach contracts and getting those written, and then what goes in there, and then pricing and all of that element? How did you know what to do, and what perhaps did you learn along the way, either through done well or little mistakes that you maybe, not necessarily mistakes, but just learning opportunities?
Right, Megan. You can. I think I call them mistakes, or little errors, or little humps on the pathways as I went through. The contract that I have now in place is a well-designed contract, which I didn't have 15 years back, right? So when I started with my first home, I'll be honest with you, it was choppy. It might have had some of the legal writings and things done, but it wasn't the best professional looking contract. But over the years, I learned, and I think it was also the many different homes, even say in nursing homes, each home happens to be a little different from the other in how they operate, right? Mm-hmm. So, in my journey of consulting with all these different homes, I think I picked up bits and pieces and put everything together, where, like I said, now I have a contractor, I have my whole bundle of forms, I call it, whenever there's like a new home, if I need to go in, then I would go in with those forms in place. And mm-hmm. I am another thing, Megan, I realized is when you have everything like that whole, you have a contract, you have all these different forms, whether it be a simple form like a food preference form, to, how am I going to track my weights, to every single form, what happens is the administrator or the corporate group feels very confident in you and who you are, because then they are not having to do anything. You're coming ready with your whole package, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and do you find when the administrators, perhaps reach out to you, or you engage with a group home that maybe is interested in menus, do you kind of assess what they need and propose a set of services that you think are a good fit for them? How does that business negotiation? I think we as dietitians are like, well, that's that other stuff, but that's the part, you're like, tell me more, right? How do you go about, as the expert and the professional, saying, okay, here's here's what I offer, here's what I recommend based on your facility? Do you manage those conversations, and what's that like?
Great question. Love that. Absolutely, I do. At this stage, especially, in fact, for the last few years, if I'm being honest with you, I would not take in any or every home that approaches me. Similarly, I'm not expecting every home to anytime we're doing a business deal, I would like to go in and take a tour of the home to see what that home looks like. What are the services that I could really offer? How could I say improve their dietary department completely? So whenever say I get a letter, or somebody calls me, I would set up an appointment to say, I would love to come in and meet with, say, the administrator, the DON, and take a tour of the facility. When I am touring now of the, and looking at the kitchen, and then I'll meet with, say, the dietary manager or the cook, I make an assessment, Megan, of what the needs are. Because needs could be very different. So, say a group home that only has say 20, 25 residents versus a much bigger home will have differences, right? So then I'm going to take a tour, and then I let them know, I'm like, I am going to send you a written email with all the information that I think I could add to add to quality of your dietary services, for example. And then I send in everything that I am able to do. And then, and that's how we kind of negotiate and talk, and come up with a plan of, what exactly is needed. And you're very right. So right now, like I said, I've got, I'm trying to count in my head, like 6 to 7 homes, right? And every single home is different from the other. So everybody has their unique needs. So one would not be the same as the other. So it is just like, if I can say, with, say, our one-on-one consults in a private setting, how one person would never be the same as the second person you get. Similarly, even if it's a nursing home, you kind of have a broad outline, but everyone is going to be a little different from the other. And I think I enjoy the differences, actually. I will be very honest with you. It can be a little challenging, because then you're like, oh, for this home, now I have to do this. But it adds variety to your day. You're doing something different, you're learning something different. So for all those young aspiring dietitians out there, I'm going to say, if you are like me, if you love variety, if you like those challenges, if you like to go into different settings, go for it. This is your field.
Yeah, you mentioned something a while back about seeing the high risk patients, and there might be a dietitian at the facility. Can you provide a little bit more information? That dietitian would be an employee of the long-term care facility, and you're kind of the backstop. They're hiring you to make sure that everything's done correctly. How does that interaction work when there's dietitians who maybe don't work for you, but they're them properly referring, and otherwise, what's that like?
Currently I have a home where I have a dietitian who does clinical it's a big nursing home, and then I have a dietary manager who takes care of the food service bit, and I am their consultant. So what when I am going in there, or doing it even online, couple times a month, what I am doing is I might review some of the things they're doing. For example, the dietary manager might run a kitchen sanitation check every
Uh-huh.
week. I would do once a month. But it's somebody with more experience. It's a different set of eyes looking in. Similarly, if say I have a dietitian who is doing the clinical, who's seeing all the new admits, the readmits. So uh, she's seeing all the new admits. Now, among the new admits, she spots somebody who is a high risk. Say, we have a resident that came in with multiple wounds, or, tube feeding, multiple things going on. Immediately, she makes a referral to me. And then I see her or him, because I think it would be too much for her then to too much on her plate because she has to see every resident that's basically walking in the building. So
Got it. Okay. That's helpful. So, for those of you who are kind of, listening in here, feel free to, if you have specific questions about some of the areas that we've touched on, feel free to, drop those in, because I think sitting with someone who has, this type of, background, it's hard to take everything you've learned over a 20-year period and dice it up in a short conversation. But you've hinted at the fact that you've created a lot of, resources throughout, as needed, right? So whether it's a food preferences form, or probably the way you present the menu that,
yeah.
that you're creating for a group home. What have you created, I think, that you're like most proud of, or that you feel like made your work tremendously easier? If you could give, a few, a couple of examples that people might not think about.
So one of the things which is actually even posted in your RD2RD site are my ebooks, which are I did like fall winter um, menu book, which and summer spring ones. I've got two ebooks in there posted, which basically, Megan, are like 4-week menus for group homes. These are standardized menus with recipes, with the groceries, with the nutrient analysis, all of that done. And I will tell you, I love it, because every group home I walk into will ask me, will you be making a menu for us? And I will tell you, as dietitians, we all know making menus takes a lot of time, especially when you're trying to do the whole thing, not only do the menus, the grocery list. So in these books, I've put in like everything. So if a dietitian, again, if a home wanted it, they could just go like, hey, I have this book right here with me, and it's got everything. So that was one of my biggest challenges, or how do I say, every time that was the same question they would ask me. So I'm like, why don't I, with all my years of experience, I kind of know what they're looking for in
Right.
terms of things. Of course, there are specifics, but I'm like, let me just create these. And so I did. And I think, if I can say so, I think I'm proud of what I created. It was my way of giving to the community of, dietitians, because that's how I think we grow, by giving to each other. So,
I love
yeah.
that. So we have some nice meaty questions coming in. So, and they're the kind of things that, of course, I would want to ask as well. So there's a couple of them around, you know, writing proposals. Like, do you ever go out and, write a proposal? You talked a little bit about this, but when you need to generate new business, and what is that like? And How long are your average contracts? How do you decide on pricing? Do you go, well, there's going to be X number of hours? How does that part work?
So, so I do a market analysis, right? So I'm based out of, say, Michigan. I am going to see what the pay rate is for dietitians who are, say, employees. Now, as an employee, you get all your benefits, which, remember, as a consultant, you get like no benefit, nothing. So what? No, in fact, you don't even get taxed. So everything, you need to work out your taxes from there. So I would keep that percentage in mind and add to what a regular employee is making, with, of course, your years of experience and your expertise, and how much. And I will tell you this, don't be afraid. If the home, again, if they are very happy with your quality of work, with what you do, there are homes that really, really, again, respect or love you for what you do, and they will pay you. So I would not compromise on that. And it's hard for me to throw a number, again, because every state is different. Every area you're from within the state is going to be different. So do a market analysis, and every state or any place you live in is going to have consultants, right? They're going to have some private consultants. They're going to have consultants who might just do corporate wellness. I'm just saying different things. So look into what they are charging, and make sure that you are at par, or you're comparable to where they're at with that. And yes, as far as you're saying, writing the contract may take time, or every time I have my basic contract, like I said, I really like what's in there now, but I do tweak it depending on the home I'm at. And again, I would sit and talk with, like, the administrator, human resource person, and see, do we want to do a contract, say, for like a year, and then I've got that, or how are we going? Are we going month to month? Things like that. In fact, that reminds me, one time I went into a home that had failed a survey, and so they wanted me to go and help them out. So that contract was much shorter, right? Because I was just trying to help them. So it would depend on what the situation is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That actually brings up a good point about getting that expertise in, regulatory and the state guidelines. How did you develop that expertise, and do you have any recommendations for getting those skills besides just working, as a dietitian? Some of that's going to, I had a background as a clinical manager, and I got way too familiar with like CMS, regulations and department. I didn't want to be that familiar, but you do over time. But how do you, besides just reading them online, how did you get that expertise?
I think just walking through as many surveys as I have. Um, and even though I'm a consultant, I do make it very clear to the home. See, that's another thing where you're talking about the quality of work you're doing. So I make it very clear to the administrators, to the DONs, even though I'm a consultant, give me a call when state walks in. I would like to know. I'd like to be in there if possible. And I typically try to show up there, even if there is no issues. Why? Because then, number one, I can walk through the survey with them, gives my dietary managers, gives the home a very good impression that you are invested in them. And through those surveys, I think I have learned to spot many of the regulations. Like you're saying, every home will have a regulation book, right, Megan, that you read, and all these rules and things like that. But there's nothing like the hands-on experience. So
the individual surveyor's application of a kind of long and complex standard, you're like, oh, because then you're aware for the next time of how it's applied and interpreted in very unique individual situations. Like, oh, right.
The surveyors, remember one thing, you're the expert. You're right. The expert. So what we know as dietitians, and why did I say something about a high risk person that I did. So
Right.
just that
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. And the policies and procedures and all that good stuff. So, I think people do have questions about, obviously, you know, what to charge. And I think a lot of, what I hear you saying is some of it is going to depend on, the market as well as the individual facility, and that ultimately it's going to perhaps take some time as well. So, of looking at what people are making, a percentage of obviously for that benefits and taxes, and that you've said don't be afraid to, charge the facility, especially if maybe you've already, you know, maybe have a relationship, or they, you don't want to sell yourself short, I guess. So I know we can't maybe say charge this amount. I think sometimes we want to hear that, but that you're probably going to have to do some of that work, or maybe engage and network with other dietitians in the area and try to find one
Right.
who might be open to meeting with you as a colleague.
Yeah, yeah. Like I have students, interns follow me, so they can see what I'm doing as a consultant. And I think that's very cool. If somebody's really looking into this field, I would highly recommend doing that. And again, market analysis of what, where you are, and what the pay scale is there. And that's how you figure out what you want to charge the building.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, no, I really appreciated that, we've kind of had this time to dive into this topic. We have a few minutes left in that, admitting my own guilt in the idea that long-term care is long hours, tons of burnout, low pay, that there's a certain, well, I work in acute care or I'm in private practice, that the reality is that there's a ton of flexibility, the opportunity to build a very,
that's
successful financially business through doing and really looking at the types of work that you enjoy, whether that's more of the menus or the, high risk patients, that you as the consultant get to really, as you grow your business, decide to pick and choose more of the kind of work that you find interesting. And if you're like me, you like to do a lot of different things. And you said that 8 to 5, like patient after patient after patient, that, that sometimes our perception and reality about what working in certain areas is like, that we should challenge those perceptions. I'm glad I had you on to talk about this. So how can people find more about you or get in touch with you if they would like to, and any resources that you might have?
absolutely. So I have my own website. It's www.dietitianmoshumi.com. So again, it's www.dietitianmoshumi.com. And I am on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn as Dietitian Moshumi, or, Moshumi Mukherjee on LinkedIn. So absolutely feel free to connect. I'm all about encouraging, helping anybody in the field. I'm very passionate. I love what I do. And like I said, I do a variety of things and I absolutely love it, enjoy it. A lot of my products are actually in RD2RD2. So if you're wanting any of the long-term forms and things like that, I am planning to post those too at
Nice.
RD2. And thank you to you,
Yeah.
Megan. RD2RD. This is one platform I so enjoy. I always recommend all my young RDs, students, volunteers to look into this, because this is just phenomenal what you provide to us as
Uh,
dietitians. So
well, this is my favorite day of the month when I get to engage and really learn from another expert in the field. So there was one, final question here. Shani was asking about, how do you clarify your role as a consultant to the nutrition staff already employed in the facility? So, you being in that consultant role versus how do you handle that?
great question. I have a sheet or a form for that too, that I then provide to them, what are my responsibilities? So it says consultant responsibilities, which I put down, made myself with over so many years of experience. But that's a great question because it is a fine line, especially say you have another dietitian, a CDM, there's many different people in there. So what is your position as a consultant? I definitely have that form also in the bundle. So it's all very clear as to what exactly my role is and what I'm going to do when I'm there. So.
Well, well, terrific. So I do have a blog post planned coming out on, some topics around long-term care resources. So you can bet I'm going to be beating Moshumi's door down trying to get that resource up in RD2RD. So there's a link to her store in the details of this video on Facebook. But if you're on our email list, as that blog comes out, you'll be sure to know about it. Thank you so much for being on today. And this was a really fun topic for me to learn more about, and I'm grateful that you were here.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks again. It
Yeah.
was wonderful.
Yeah.
Take care.
Okay.
Bye.